to get it in. Does to Smith. Jabari for three and the win. Yeah! He got it!
What's up, everyone? Of course, I'm Lashard Binkley, and this is Rockets Field Podcast, Rockets Report. And today, of course, we are talking about the release of the Houston Rockets 2023-24 schedule. It is good to actually have some basketball news to talk about because, of course, we are in the middle of August, which means there isn't a lot of basketball news or topics to actually talk about these days as we are um, in full swing with the baseball season. The Houston Astros, and of course, Houston Texans just played their first preseason game. They have another one coming up. So, like I said, not a lot of basketball news going on right now. So it's good to have something to talk about. And today's show, we're going to quickly kind of break down the schedule, specifically the first 10 games. We're going to talk about some of the notable games coming up this season, break down some of the numbers between last year and this year as far as the schedule, and also give a brief summary of how some of the Rockets did last season and some of the newer Rockets did last season versus the Orlando Magic, their first opponent and opening night this season. So hopefully you enjoy the show, and let's get into it. All right, so as we look at the schedule that was released today, the Rockets actually play 7 of their first 10 games on the at home this season, compared to it was reversed last year where they played only 3 games out of their first 10 at home and played 7 on the road, and that led to a 1-9 start to the season last season. Something that put the Rockets automatically in a hole last season. Something they're going to look to try to definitely avoid this upcoming season. As I mentioned earlier, the Rockets' first opponent is the Orlando Magic, Paulo Banchero and the Orlando Magic. So that'll be a very interesting game with two young teams trying to come up from the cellar. Orlando, of course, had a better season than the Rockets did last season, but they're both two young teams trying to prove that they actually belong in some type of playoff conversation. So to start off the season with Jabari Smith going up against Paulo Banchero, we all know that story by now. Jabari Smith definitely is going to be looking to have better games than he did last season against Orlando Magic. So that'll be a great opening game. Of course, they have Franz Wagner. Like I mentioned, they have Paulo Banchero. They have a lot of good young players, and it'll be a really good test, especially on the road for the still young Rockets. I know they added some veterans, but they're still a fairly young team. And then if you're looking at the number 2 game, I mean, you go from one young team on the rise to another young team on the rise, and Victor Wembanyama and the Spurs. That'll be, of course, the Spurs' second game, as they already have a home opener versus the Dallas Mavericks, which we already kind of saw coming, because with Victor Wembanyama, that means that the Spurs are going to have a lot more attention on their games. Unfortunately, the second game is not going to be a nationally televised game, as the Rockets, I'll talk a little bit about more, don't really have that many nationally televised games coming up, but they face off against the Spurs in the second game. And then the third game, I mean, you're talking about they're going up against Golden State, Chris Paul and the Warriors. So, man, what a way to start off the season with 3 big-time games to start the season off, and you'll definitely see what the Rockets are. Like I mentioned earlier, the Rockets went 1-9 in their first 10 games last season, which pretty much their season was over with after 10 games. And I like to talk about the 10-game period because that's kind of where you already know where teams are going to be in the first 10 games. So if you're starting off again struggling 1-9, it's hard to get out of that hole. I don't care how good of a team you are, unless you're the Lakers, who have 2 of the top 10 players in the league, because they had a rough start to last season. But if you're the Rockets, you don't want to start off again like you did last season. Again, like I said, last season they started off 1-9. It didn't help that they had 7 of their first 10 games were on the road. And then on top of that, they opened the season last year against Atlanta. They lost a tough game with the Atlanta Hawks to kind of kick off last season. And then from there, it was kind of a snowball effect. They only had 1 win in the first 10, and that was against the Utah Jazz, 114-108 last season. But other than that, they lost 9 of their first 10 games last season. As I mentioned earlier, the Rockets will open up against the Magic on the road. Their home opener won't come until the third game when they take on Chris Paul, Steph Curry, you know them, the Golden State Warriors. So that would be a great home opener. Hopefully I'll be able to be out at that game. to break down and bring you some of the news and locker room reports before and after the game. I'm actually, if you're looking at the first 10 games, it's kind of hard to give a prediction because you really don't know what's going to happen because you haven't seen anybody on the court. But just looking at the games, I think the Rockets actually can split the first 10 games and go 5-5. And for the Rockets, that would be a huge improvement over the last couple of seasons if they ever go 5-5. I have them actually beating the Spurs, losing to the Magic on opening night, just because it's the Magic home opener. I think the Rockets are going to be a lot more focused in that second game on the road against Victor Wembanyama and the Spurs. I think everybody's going to get up to play the Spurs now this year. And then I have them beating the Hornets. They have a home and home with the Kings. I have them splitting one of those games with the Kings. I have them beating the Pelicans. And then to finish off the first 10 games, I have them winning on the road against the Clippers because at that point, I wouldn't be surprised if Kawhi Leonard or Paul George are already doing their load management thing and not actually even playing in that game. So don't be surprised if the Rockets are actually able to pull that out. Like I said, that's why I have the Rockets winning, splitting the first 10 games going 5-5. But as I mentioned before, as is custom for the Houston Rockets the last few seasons, they only have one nationally televised game. Sorry, NBA TV, I don't count you as a nationally televised game, so that's why I say only one. And that one game is January 12th versus the Pistons. So that makes over 80 games are going to be on AT&T Sports Southwest, maybe, because at this point, we don't even know if AT&T Sports Southwest is even going to be around, so it may be another channel. But all that to say is that the Rockets will not be on nationally televised games pretty much at all this season, except for one time, unless they flex in the Rockets. Maybe the Rockets get off to a hot start and they want to flex in the game with the Rockets. But as we stand right now, the Rockets have one nationally televised game, and that's not until January 12th, and it's against the Pistons. Some other numbers that we can break down, some other notable numbers and things I saw as I went through the schedule. For the first time in a long time, the Rockets had a tradition where they had games on New Year's Eve pretty much almost every year. I can't remember last year they didn't have a game on New Year's Eve, but this year, no New Year's Eve game. So be kind of interesting to hear why they're not having a game this year on New Year's Eve, but no New Year's Eve game. 14 sets of back-to-backs as the NBA's tried to limit back-to-backs over the last couple of seasons. Rockets will play 13 of 20 games on the road from January 8th through February 14th, which is heading into All-Star Weekend, which also encompasses the NBA trade deadline. So that's kind of interesting, kind of going into All-Star break. Post All-Star break, Houston will not play more than 3 consecutive games at home or on the road. The Rockets actually do play on MLK Day this year. They play at 12 o'clock in Philadelphia against Joel Embiid and maybe James Harden. I'll be surprised if it's James Harden on that team at that point. So we'll just go with Joel Embiid and probably Tyrese Maxey and Tobias Harris, who they can never seem to trade at this point. The Rockets will finish the season with 3 straight road games. Whether that actually matters to the Rockets or not, who knows at this point. Maybe the Rockets are fighting for a play-in spot. That would be something. But for right now, we really don't know. But we do know the Rockets will be finishing the season with 3 straight road games to end the season. All right, some of the other notable games as we break down the schedule. The Rockets will face the Lakers for the first time early on, November the 8th. They actually play the Lakers twice in November. Dylan Brooks returns to Memphis for the first time December 15th. So that ought to be interesting to see what kind of reception he gets from the Memphis. I would imagine it'd be positive because it wasn't necessarily his decision. The team decided they didn't want him. So we'll see how that goes. M.A. makes his return to Boston on January 13th. So again, that ought to be interesting. But again, yes, M.A. did some things he probably shouldn't have did that got him fired. But at the end of the day, it wasn't his decision to leave. So again, I don't see any boos or anything happening with that or his return to Boston. And then Fred VanVleet makes his return to Toronto. Now that might be a little bit different because ultimately Fred VanVleet made a decision to leave Toronto. And if you go look at some of the Toronto Raptors fans that they were talking about Fred VanVleet this last season, a lot of them weren't necessarily happy with VanVleet. So, but I have to believe he's played his entire career up until this point there. He helped bring a championship there. I have to imagine they're going to give him the whole tribute video, and I don't see that many people booing him, but he'll make his return to Toronto on February 9th. And as I mentioned earlier, the Rockets will be taking on the Orlando Magic. I want to break down some of the numbers as far as how some of the Rockets did and how some of the new Rockets did against Orlando last season. Of course, with the Rockets being in the West and Orlando being in the East, they only play them twice a year unless it's the finals, which we haven't saw that since 1995, and I don't think we'll be seeing that next season, so it'll only be 2 games again next season. But in the 2 games last year, Jalen Green probably had his best series, one of his best series against opposing team. He averaged 27 points, over 27 points, over 40% three-point shooting last year versus the Magic, as he led the Rockets in scoring versus the Magic last year in 2 games. 2 games that they split. They went 1-1 with the Magic. KPJ led the team in assists with 8 assists and shot over 47% from three-point range. Alperensengun led in offensive rating. He had over 120 offensive rating in 2 games versus the Magic. So basically, he was giving the Magic work last season. Jabari Smith, who we all know had a chip on his shoulder, was not happy with the way things went as far as the draft. He thought he was going to be going to Orlando. We all know the story, blah, blah, blah at this point. But he struggled in 2 games against the Magic last year. He only averaged 6.5 points in 2 games and only shot 33%, which is going to be kind of a theme on the other 2 players I'm about to talk about, which is Fred VanVleet and Dillon Brooks. Of course, Fred VanVleet played in Eastern Conference last year with the Raptors, so he played them 4 games last season. He averaged 15.5 points, but he only shot 33.3% from the field versus the Magic last season. So, of course, we're going to be looking for him to improve on that this upcoming season, especially in the opener. Then, of course, Dillon Brooks, he played with Memphis, so, of course, he was in the West just like the Rockets. He played them twice last season. He averaged 12 points, but yet again, struggled from the field. I didn't think Orlando was some defensive juggernaut, but they did improve on defense last season. So maybe these numbers aren't some type of anomaly that we should overlook. Dillon Brooks only shot 31% from the field and only 19% from 3. Ouch! And the 2 games that he faced off against the Magic last season. So it's some room for improvement, especially from the newer Rockets facing off against the Orlando Magic in that home opener. Of course, we're going to be talking a lot more about that opening game against the Orlando Magic coming up close as we get closer to October. And also, of course, we get closer to training camp, which is going to be coming up probably late September, first week of October. We don't know exactly when yet. But that's going to be the next biggest news as far as when it comes to the Houston Rockets. So we will definitely be breaking that down more as we get closer to that. But again, looking at the schedule, NBA schedule is always kind of hard to decipher once you get past the first 10 games. There's so many more variables that come into play after you get past the first 10 or 15 games with injuries and players getting traded and players in and out of the rotation. So that's why, I only broke down the first 10 games. But like I said, as we get closer to the season, we'll start to break down more and more of the schedule. Again, like I said, only 1 nationally televised game. That's January 12th against the Pistons. So, again, most of the games will be on the regional sports network, wherever that's going to be. Well, I guess we'll find out as we get closer to the season. But, again, I appreciate everybody that jumps on, joins the podcast. We will definitely be doing more player profiles. We just did one on Fred VanVleet, so make sure you check that out. We'll be doing more this upcoming season. Maybe be doing some retro Rockets. Maybe we talk about the 2008, 9 or 2009, 10 Houston Rockets team. We may also do some more other analysis of pick and roll games or how the Rockets get Jabari Smith more involved in offense. We're going to be doing a lot of things this upcoming offseason because we're going to be having a lot of time before we actually get closer to training camp. So again, we appreciate everybody that supports the channel. Make sure you hit that subscribe button. Make sure you hit that like button because we don't just do podcasts. We do it all here. We try to keep you entertained as we try to all get through this long off season before we actually get back to some actual basketball. But we appreciate your support and make sure you check out the next episode of Rockets Field Podcast, Rockets Report.